You're watching The Viewpoint. My name is Mike Migu. This is Good Morning Kenya. Now being a Wednesday, it's all about women at the forefront. And in studio, we are talking about setting up startups that make social impact. In studio, I'm joined by Lindsay Strantley, who is a founding partner at Synergy Collaborative. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great.
Yes. Yeah. Now, when you talk about startups that make social impacts, from your perspective, how can they become a tool for solving real-life problems?
Yeah. I mean, I think the starting place is that as a founder, as a leader within a startup, you need to be driven by passion, have a sense of purpose, and make sure that your startup knows the problem you're trying to solve, both the social problem as well as the economic opportunity that you can create through your work. So in our case, as the Synergy Collaborative, and then Fresh Life, which is our sanitation services company within the collaborative, we focus on providing great sanitation, and in doing so, create a lot of jobs and economic opportunity for the communities we serve, as well as obviously with great sanitation means you have great environmental benefits and health benefits for those communities and for Nairobi and Kenya as a whole.
Yes. So from what you've said, founder motivation and intent are crucial when it comes to setting up a startup that makes impact.
Yes, and very much.
All right. How does it speak to the fact that, does it mean that for a startup of such nature, they have to pivot several times before they can find their purpose?
Great question. I would say the purpose is your North Star. It's the thing that as the founder and all of the leaders, the team working on that startup should be aligned on from day one. But now how you accomplish that purpose, you will need to pivot so many times along the way. As the challenges and opportunities for the customers that you serve, the communities that we serve, evolve to identify what is the best way. So again, in our case, to serve the most people with the best sanitation. And at different times, we've adjusted our service delivery as well as the stakeholders, the additional partners that you need to bring on board to make sure that you're maximizing your purpose.
Yes. Does it mean that, let's say, for a founder, you have to leave the problem that you're trying to solve? Is it a must that you have to?
To lead that, yeah.
To leave that, live within that problem so that you can solve it?
Good question. I would say you need to deeply understand the problem that you're trying to solve. So in our case, we focus on great sanitation for urban informal settlements and other areas without sewers. So I can't say that this was the community that I lived in at the time that we started this work. So instead, to better understand the problem means both spending time with your customers, with the communities you're going to serve, and then making sure your team does come with a lot of that lived experience. So even if it's not me as the founder that lives that every single day, I'm surrounded by and formed by a great team who has lived that experience, and making sure that we are always responsive to our customers and understanding their needs and how do we continually improve our services.
Yes. Between the social impact aspect and the business side of a startup, which should supersede the other, or how do they balance?
Yeah. I think for each startup, that balance might look a little different. So that may depend on your investors, what kind of returns are they expecting, and the other stakeholders you bring on board. So as Fresh Life, we work really closely with the government, and as well as other social impact partners who are focused on, I'd say, more on impact than on economic returns for the company. And instead, we see some of that impact is the economic returns for the communities that we serve. So that's where we've focused as Fresh Life, but certainly many startups may focus more on the profits and see that the key, you have to remain sustainable, financially profitable in order to continue your impact. So at all times you have to keep enough focus on that financial viability and sustainability and profitability, if that's what your investors expect, in order to continue to generate impact.
So whatever you want to achieve must be in line with the expectations of the investors.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Now, starting something up require funding. So how do such startups, especially ones that want to make they want to leave a social footprint, how do they fare within the funding ecosystem? Yes.
So for startups that have that impact focus, it's key to blend probably multiple forms of capital to both to get started and with capital injections you'll need along the way. So as the Synergy Collaborative and as Fresh Life, we've brought on financing partners, particularly in the kind of philanthropic grants, especially in the early days, as well as then public donors, so some of the government, international donors, as well as significant in-kind support and collaboration with our utility and government partners here in Kenya. So you need to blend different kinds of capital, I think, at different times to make sure that you're have the working capital you need to begin and can sustain your operations as you grow and bring on your customer base. And in our case, because we're primarily focused on that impact, we will work often to bring in additional nonprofit, philanthropic support that can allow us to really focus on that impact even over the profitability. But in other cases, so we have a partner organization called Regen Organics that does all the waste treatment of our sanitation waste. And in their case, they've brought in social impact focused equity or debt investors. So they do need to obviously give returns back to those equity or debt investors, but they're part of why they come on board is to see that impact. So again, just like you said, there's a balance of impact and profitability, and in each of those two cases, so with Fresh Life or with Regen Organics, the balance is slightly different, but the impact is always critical.
How does a business plan play out in all this now?
Business plan is so key. And when we first started, I think you have a vision of exactly how it's going to play out. And the only thing that's for sure is that it won't go exactly according to plan. So you need that plan, and you need to be ready to pivot when circumstances change or assumptions that you've made turn out not to be quite as you thought they would be.
It goes back to the first point that we were talking about, startups pivoting several times before they can find their footing. Now, there's also, how can they leverage networks and partnerships now and maybe expand funding opportunities to get the exact impact they want within the community?
Yeah. Partners are key. We couldn't do, we serve 300,000 people every day with great sanitation, and there's no way we could do that without the partners that we've brought on board over the years. Probably most importantly is our government partners. So we work with the utilities, so here in Nairobi, Kisumu, Eldoret, Mombasa, with the utilities in those cities, the public utilities, as well as the counties, and then of course the national government. I think even in a case that's less, as sanitation, obviously this is a government responsibility ultimately, that we are coming on board as a partner to help support our public sector partners in the private sector operations. But I think even in cases that are more, may say, profit-focused, it's still critical to understand both those government partners. And then in both cases, as you said, to bring in financing, to understand who else really cares deeply about this. How do you help them care even more deeply so that they bring in the financing that you need? So whether that's grant funders or, like we said, in some cases, investors through equity or debt. And then really critically is the additional community stakeholders. So the other civil society organizations, other startups operating in the same space, that you need to understand what they're doing and how do you create synergies that all of our work together, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's all about collaboration with the full network of stakeholders.
Do you have to have expectations of the community that you want to impact when you want to start your operations of whatever kind in that area? Do you need to have expectations, or you get into it with an open mind?
I think on day zero, so before you begin, you should have an open mind. That all startups need to be informed by primary market research. You go in and you understand the problem and make sure that you're, as a founder, as an early stage leader, that you're creating a solution that really fits that problem. And it's really important to check all of your assumptions at the door. You have to go in with that open mind. But as you learn, as you come to understand the problem, the business problem, and the impact problem that you want to solve, then key to that is understanding how the community is going to come on board as customers, as advocates, as employees, that they can bring their understanding and their skills to bear on that problem that you're solving. You
are into sanitation, and actually it's a public health issue. But then again, what are the opportunities there and the gaps that point to a market need?
Yeah, so indeed sanitation or lack of sanitation can have significant public health consequences, not just for the individual person, but whole communities, whole cities. And you can see this also in the environmental consequences. We talk a lot, of course, about river cleanup, and we just had World Environment Day, so understanding how sanitation waste pollutes Nairobi, pollutes the cities we live in, and as a result also then leads to significant public health issues, which in turn lead to big economic issues. When you think people are sick and they're unable to go to work, unable to go to school, it's a lot of loss of productivity for thousands of people in our city every day. So there's this macroeconomic opportunity at the municipal and the public sector level to provide great sanitation. But now on the business level, I think that's where we're focused here. People have to spend money to access sanitation. So be that paying your utility bills, to Nairobi Water, simple here, or paying, to use a public toilet, maybe you're paying per use. So in our case as Fresh Life, we said we want to make sure even those who don't have access, who aren't connected to a sewer, how do they have great sanitation, a great toilet, every day, access 24 hours a day, and instead of spending on that per toilet, say public toilet access, you can save that money and even spend less as a service fee, as a subscription toward our services. So there's hopefully an economic win-win where our customers are able to pay for the services, but now pay less than what they would be spending otherwise. And on top of that, like you said, because there's a public health issue, they're also saving in the money they might spend on health issues, on visiting a clinic, on lost wages for not being able to work that day from being sick, and even on top of the direct savings for our services as compared to the other options they might have.
What innovative solutions can be put in place, or they have been put in place so far, that you think they address sanitation in a manner that is sustainable?
So I think a key to making sure that everybody has great sanitation is to start by acknowledging we'll need multiple solutions. So there's no one sustainable solution for sanitation, no one silver bullet. Instead, we work with our government partners toward what we call a citywide inclusive sanitation approach, which is just sort of fancy words that mean we need to do several things, kind of a portfolio approach, if you take a business idea to it. So that means where we have made investments in sewers that work well, let's maintain those. Let's serve people with that infrastructure investment. And then where we don't have sewer access, and maybe won't in the near term, there's lots of reasons, budgets, topography, all sorts of issues, challenges to expand. So for the half of our population here in Nairobi that doesn't have access to a sewer, what are the other sustainable ways that we can provide great, equally high quality sanitation? And that's where we've come in as Fresh Life through an approach called container-based sanitation services, where instead of pipes, basically think of it like the way we have solid waste collection. We're able to seal and remove entire containers to ensure continuous service with a beautiful high quality toilet that everyone has access to. We've talked about setting up those startups, but it's not always a smooth sail. No.
What would you say are the biggest impediments to coming up with startups that make social impact?
Well, I think your questions are spot on in terms of financing. So an obvious challenge is making sure you have the funding from the beginning, and then you almost always will need more than you think in those early days, because it's probably going to take longer to bring on the number of customers you project, bring in the revenue that you project, and along the way, you need to make sure you don't run out of cash. Ultimately, cash is king. So that's a key part, is making sure you've brought in those partners, investors, financing. I think another big part is having the right team, and especially if that your team can deeply understand the customer segment and the kind of market and impact problem that you're trying to solve. So bringing in those great colleagues, both as leaders, and in our case, what we've done as Fresh Life is most of our team we hire from the communities we serve, and we invest a lot in their growth, supporting them in their professional development, such that today, many of our managers started with us as entry-level staff, straight from the communities, the customer segment that we're serving.
So, coming up with a startup that wants to make a difference in the lives of people is a noble idea. But then again, at what point do you bring in the government, the private sector, all those stakeholders to ensure that the dream of making social income, besides making business, is achieved?
Yeah, great question. When we first began, I think we started very much focused as a business. Like a good entrepreneur, we said, okay, we have this idea, this model, we can serve our customers great as the private sector, as an individual social enterprise, all on our own. And I think that's you have to have that kind of bold belief, I think, as an entrepreneur. And then pretty quickly you learn you're going to need the whole village to come with you, and definitely the government as well. And so from the beginning, we were in good communication, kind of collaboration with the government, but saw them as as the regulator, as the advisor, as opposed to like the key partner that they've become. And so that's one of the pivots we made along the way, was to say, for this to be sustainable in the long term, this has to be in partnership with and through the utilities and the government, more than a kind of regulatory relationship, but as a kind of holding hands side by side in the implementation and in kind of embedding the approach within their strategic plans and their long-term financial planning.
What should be the go-to-market strategy for any startup that is seeking to make that social impact we are talking about?
To go to market, again, the first thing you have to do is literally like go to the market, go really spend that time understanding your that market, the opportunities that you can bring with your solution, and then start initially slowly. Don't try to go in, I would say, on day one to 100% of scale that you're aiming for. If you start slowly with those kind of first customers, those early adopters, right? You're going to learn so much from them of what do they appreciate about your service? What's the real value proposition? Like in our case, we thought that the value proposition was our beautiful Fresh Life toilet. And it is, but what people appreciated even more was the service. It's making sure you have high quality service is even more important than kind of just the product by itself. And we learned that by listening to some of those early customers and ultimately adjusting then kind of how we sort of our pricing, our business model based on that feedback. So if you go too far too fast, then I don't think you spend enough time listening to the customer and you're not still nimble enough. Once you get bigger, it's harder to pivot, right? You have so much more existing customer base, existing commitments. It's a lot more difficult to make those shifts later on when you're larger. So early on, be listening and learning and ready to be flexible based on what you learn.
Yes. We are living in an information age. And for a startup, what is the importance of leveraging on the social media space or the digital space to make sure that you reach the right people?
Yes. We are very engaged with both our kind of customers, our end users, the communities that we serve on social media and through a range of mobile kind of applications that we've developed to communicate directly with our customers. It's equally important that we leverage social media to speak to the broader community, like we're doing this morning, right? It's important for everybody in Nairobi and in Kenya to understand the importance of sanitation. It's something that when you have access to safe sanitation, we take for granted, totally. So it's really important that we are reminded that not everyone has that daily access, because only with that reminder will we all sufficiently prioritize sanitation within public budgets, within private sector partnerships, and as a community, as a country. So that's where that level of engagement online is really key to continue to raise and sustain awareness of how critical great sanitation is for us as Kenya to thrive.
Any startup that is coming up, does it need a strong brand first, or they first need to test their business model?
I think the brand and the business model have to go hand in hand. So we did develop the Fresh Life brand, initial logo, before we started operations. So and in this case, we did a lot of research with our kind of target customer segment to explain or understand, from their perspective, the problem and explain the potential solution and understand then what brands, like the names itself, resonate with that problem as they experience it and with the solutions that we were bringing forward. And so that's where we came with Fresh Life, came from that process. But now for that to become a brand that anyone recognizes, that's meaningful to any of our customers, that part went hand in hand with actually starting those initial operations, bringing on those early adopters we talked about. So in our case, Fresh Life started, our Fresh Life toilets started only as commercial toilets. So we worked with micro entrepreneurs. So think the men and women who run dukas, water points, maybe they have a kinyozi, whatever this is, where they have a small business, and now they could add 1 or 2 or 3 toilets in that same space to serve their neighbors. And what this did was it made our brand very visible, very public, because the toilets were all in public places. So people came to recognize, like, those blue toilets, those blue structures are toilets, and they're always going to be clean and safe and open. And that kind of word of mouth is so powerful. And I think so key, especially in the early days where you don't have yet so much revenue, right? You need to leverage that brand and word of mouth from reputation. And then over time, we've now shifted to focus most of our operations are actually inside like a residential plot. So directly to within a household or within a residential setting, which are not so visible. But we were able to leverage that brand recognition, that visibility that we had from the initial go-to-market strategy of those public commercial toilets, such that now residential communities, schools know what those are, and then they're coming to us saying they need this great sanitation, obviously inside their neighborhoods too.
If I have come up with a startup that wants to make that social impact, how do I scale up? We are talking about franchising, making tech solutions or partnerships. How do I go about that?
And I think to scale up, the first step is to get your unit economics right. So if you start to scale something that you haven't really figured out, so that the economics aren't there, or the customer value proposition isn't solid, then you might grow into create a really big mess, create something that's large but not sustainable, or only serving kind of misunderstood and is taken up by part of the customers you wanted to serve, but not interesting to the rest. So to scale, first is to really understand those unit economics and the value proposition, basically, why do your customers love what your service is, love your product, and then really lean in there. Once you are confident in the kind of economics and that value that you're creating, then it's much more straightforward to now kind of replicate that. Maybe it's in a new geography, or reaching into additional customers where you can bring that same value and that same economic model.
Are there metrics to measuring the level of social impact that a startup may have?
Yes, it's very important. I think if you are an impact-focused startup, that you understand what is your probably one single most important impact metric, and then probably have a range of additional ways that you understand the dimensions of your impact. So for us as Fresh Life, the single most important thing is the number of people that we serve every day with great sanitation. So for us, that's almost 300,000 people. And that comes from having safe, open toilets. It's sort of obvious. If the toilets, the services aren't there, then people can't use them. So then we also measure not only the number of facilities, the size of the network, but also the standards. So how clean are they? They're not clean, then we fix that, we close them down. So you're looking at those sort of health metrics. And then another key one for us is the tons of waste, so of sanitation waste, that we make sure is safely managed and treated. So right now that's 23,000 tons of waste every year that is that we're capturing sort of through our network and making sure it's safely treated, and that would otherwise probably be ending up in the rivers, in the community all around us here in Nairobi, in Kisumu, in Eldoret. And the last one for us that's really key, and I think something that we talk about a lot these days, is carbon. So by capturing those 23,000 tons of sanitation waste, we actually mitigate about 30,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So sounds kind of complicated. It just means methane. So basically, otherwise, all of that waste would be decomposing and emitting a lot of really dangerous greenhouse gases that we make sure doesn't happen. So those are some of the key ways we think about our impact. The people served, that's about dignity and health. The environmental impact in terms of waste removed and climate. And then finally, and most importantly, probably in the communities, is also the economic impact that we have. So the jobs created, directly employed by us, but also by our partners, our franchisees who operate our network. That's how we understand our impact.
Yes. All right. Now, any business that is, or even a startup that is operating, is it important to have an exit strategy, really?
I think it is important to have a long-term plan. And for some startups, that's going to mean that the investors or the founders exit and transition that to different leadership, to different owners, right? When you think of a startup kind of going public, it's exiting from those initial investors now to being bought by a broader base of owners, by the public, if you will. So that's one way of thinking of an exit. For something that's primarily impact focused, it's not going to generate large kind of profit returns. In that case, I think for Fresh Life, our kind of exit, if you will, is that partnership with government. And that may not mean that we stop doing what we're doing, but that we're more kind of part and parcel of the utility plans and operations. And so, for example, if you go to Kisumu, our toilets are co-branded with Kiwasco, with the Kisumu Water and Sanitation Company. And over time, that kind of exit has to be that it looks more and more just like another part of the services that the utility is providing to all residents of Kisumu, right? That still might be done functionally by Fresh Life, so not necessarily leaving, but kind of exiting or transitioning, let's say, from the initial market entry that's very focused in our case on that initial brand and kind of company operations.
Yes. Thank you so much. Your final words.
My final words, and I have to emphasize just how important great sanitation is, and how much that can be the backbone of a thriving Kenya. We can be healthier, we can be cleaner, and ultimately live high quality lives that I think are what the Kenya of the future should be.
Yes, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
That is Lindsay Stradley, who is a founding partner of Synergy Collaborative, talking to us about setting up startups that make social impact. This is where we end this conversation and the entire Good Morning Kenya. On behalf of my colleagues, thank you for tuning in. My name is Mike. May we enjoy the rest of your viewing.